Good morning and welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. My name is Alison Miller and I have the great privilege of serving this congregation as minister. And I am joined today in our service by Stearns Matthews, our Director of Music Ministries, and Lisa Vigiano, our guest musician here today. We have Gabor Kiss and Alex West on AV, thank you, and Alan Hicks as our usher. So thank you to the village that helps create a worship service. I will acknowledge that Marjorie, who is on the order of service, who was going to be our Sunday associate, was under the weather today, and we're practicing staying home when we're under the weather. So in case Marjorie's watching right now, I hope that you continue to feel better. And hello to all the people who are with us online as well. I invite those in the room and those online to join me in saying an affirmation we often share. And I'll say the words, and then you can repeat after me. There's 3 parts. It is good to be. It is good to be. It is good to be here. It is good to be here. It is so good to be here and online together. It is so good to be here and online together. Welcome, welcome, one and all. I have just a few announcements to share with you. Our next Odyssey is planned for Sunday, February 20th at 1 p.m. here in the sanctuary and also on Zoom. There'll be a Zoom link, and it will feature Elbjorg Birkenkamp. The Odyssey is our monthly chance to hear the stories of one of our members and their sense of what's involved in leading a meaningful life. So the video presentation of Elbjorg's Odyssey will be followed by a time of questions and answers, and you can ask questions from inside the room, and I'm so excited to be with people in the room again, and also online. So wherever you're most comfortable, you can ask questions from the Zoom room as well for those Odyssey programs. Second, the Lunch Bunch will resume meeting next Sunday. They meet up at the Florham Park Diner following the second service at 12:45 p.m. If you have any questions, you can contact Carolyn Schwartz via our online directory on Realm. If you have any trouble with how to do that, Stearns or I or a number of other folks could help you, and you can also call the office to ask questions. The one Sunday that the Lunch Bunch doesn't meet, it meets most Sundays, is the Odyssey program Sunday. So it's resuming next Sunday. It will not meet on the Odyssey Sunday on February 20th. Third, we are launching a young adult group for members and friends ages 18 to 35 following this service at 12:30 p.m. on Zoom. And the link is in the pastoral update, which is in your inbox, and it's also posted on Facebook in that same letter. We have another announcement that came in this morning, inviting you to consider joining the Ministry of Hospitality. We are interested in finding out if you'd like to volunteer as an usher or as a greeter on the welcome table. And if you'd like to get involved, you can visit the welcome table following the service or talk to Alan about ushering. And you can also email welcome@muuf.org to let us know you would like to participate. Finally, our collection is being split today between our fellowship and Planned Parenthood of Morristown. We invite you to give via text, via our website, or by putting cash in the basket or checks in the basket, or you can certainly mail checks in as well. Once again, welcome to all of you, to longtime members, to newcomers, to folks online, and to everyone here. It is great to be together. I invite you to look in your order of service and to join me in the chalice lighting, a unison covenant written by James Villa Blake. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now will you join with us in an antiphonal reading? The order of service is in the hands of folks in the room. It was also attached to the email that was sent out this last night, actually, not this morning. We are going to share in a responsive reading called You Are Welcome Here, and it's written by Reverend Dr. Deborah Hafner, and we also have the words right behind us on the screen, so if you prefer to look up, that's great. And I invite people on this side of the room to read the first lines with me, and then people on Stern's side of the room to read the second lines with him. And if you're at home, you could read the whole thing. You could read with both of us.
Choose your own adventure.
Choose your own adventure, exactly. And this is a grounding reading for our time together today. You are welcome here. If you are straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, intersexual, demisexual, pansexual, or asexual, or resist labels completely.
You are whole and welcome here.
If you are transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, or cisgender.
You are whole and welcome here.
If you are confused about your sexuality, have questions, struggle in an intimate relationship, or struggle because you aren't in one.
You are whole and welcome here.
If you have had an abortion or an unintended pregnancy, given up a child, had a miscarriage, have AIDS or HIV, struggle with infertility or sexual dysfunction.
You are whole and welcome here.
If you have been the victim of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, or sexual assault.
You are whole and welcome here.
If you have made sexual decisions or had behaviors that you regret.
You are welcome here, and we will help you offer restorative justice and healing.
Your sexuality is holy and sacred and an integral part of who you are.
You are whole and welcome here.
As Unitarian Universalists, we will side with you, love you, and fight for your rights.
We seek to create a world where sexuality and sexual diversity is celebrated with holiness and integrity. I invite you to join in humming if you're in the room behind your mask, and in singing if you're at home in our opening song, How Could Anyone by Libby Roderick. And Lisa's going to help me out.
So I want to share at the beginning of this service, where we are lifting up reproductive justice, that the issues we're raising can be very difficult and might bring up stories from your life. And if you need to step out of this room or online, if you need to step away from your computer or phone, I encourage you to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. You can take a break and come back. You can be here the whole time. And I want to remind folks that you can set up a pastoral appointment with me through the Calendly app, which is www.calendly.com/Alison Miller. And I invite anyone who would like to do that to do so. You can also call and leave a message to set up an appointment as well. Part of reproductive justice is centering the voices of women of color and people who are marginalized and trans folks. And we have two poems that we'll be sharing. Lisa is going to share the first one, and I'll share the second, centering two women's voices. And I invite you to open your hearts and to listen.
Carmen Barroso is in the women's movement since her youth and has supported movement building throughout her distinguished career, beginning as a university professor and a founder of a women's study center in Brazil. In the 1990s, she was a director of the MacArthur Foundation, which supported women's organizations in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. She retired from her position as the director of the Western Hemisphere of IPPF, but continues to be active for reproductive and sexual rights through writing, consulting, or serving in a global committee, for instance, committees on the UN, the WHO, and UNFPA. When she received the UN Population Award, her speech dedicated it to the doctor who had made her abortion when she was a student, dreaming to overcome the Brazilian dictatorship. She started writing poetry in the last decade and has published some, mostly in Portuguese. Forgive Me, Father was written when the Pope pardoned women who had abortions. Forgive Me, Father, by Carmen Barroso. Forgive me, Holy Father, because I was so ignorant. I did not know how to protect myself. Forgive me, Holy Father, because I was so stupid. I thought it would never happen to me. Forgive me, Father, because I was so naive. I believed you would take care of me. Forgive me, Father, because I was so weak. I could not convince you of my reasons. Forgive me, Father, because I was so dense. I did not appreciate the guilting power of the church. Forgive me, Father, because I was so powerless. I did not have many options. Forgive me, Father, Holy Father, because I was so ashamed. I did not stop the priest from playing with my body.
Will you breathe with me? Let us breathe and be in the silence and allow those words to settle. Reproductive justice is about a number of different things. It is about the right to access an abortion, and it's also about the right to have children in healthy contexts. Megan Spencer is a Black feminist artist, scholar, and mother. She is a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in the United States, where she studies Black feminist ecology, specifically how Black women's visual art and literature show us connections between ecological crises and various forms of racial, sexual, and state violence. This poem was written for her daughter. It reflects on the author's experience of her daughter's birth and the process of coming to understand her precarious entrance to the world as part of a pattern of Black women's disproportionate vulnerability to preterm labor and birth. Megan believes that poetry is part of a Black feminist tradition of moving between thought and feeling, and has been a necessary aspect of healing from birth trauma. The poem is called On Mother's Day, Our First Together, by Megan Spencer. One morning in December, under the newborn moon, I am split open in the operating room. A scalpel cuts a smile across my rounding belly. I come apart to make a way for you. I am flesh, then vessel, then canal, then empty, and just like that, we are too. Red, wet, and swollen-faced, you enter the world beneath glaring white light, dark curls slick and sticky like a baby bird, soft bones, ears folded shut. You too are there in this room, where everyone has a job to do. When you came, your lungs were still readying, and I needed more time to teach you how to breathe in this sharp, demanding world. I am trying to convince you to stay, how to make you choose this unforgiving place that snatches up anything loved by Black girls, especially Black girls themselves. I am afraid of everything. You are smaller than anything I have ever loved or held, barely a papaya in my open hands. Will you swim in the ocean one day? Will you eat salted tomato sandwiches in August? Obsess about the way the light moves through water? Will I have time to read you Lucille Clifton? There is language and color here. I promise if you wait, there is more than these tangled and infinite wires and this constant threat of rupture. There is a sky out there. I pray your tiny feet grow roots into this terrifying earth and not the moonless black night dusted with stars. Will you breathe with me? Our offering today will be split between the Morristown UU Fellowship and Planned Parenthood of Morristown. And before we hear our offering of music and before we take our collection this morning, we want to show you a 1.5-minute video called Faith Leaders Stand with Planned Parenthood.
My name is Reverend Timothy McDonald III.
Rabbi Lori Kaufman.
Reverend Darcy Roque.
Pastor Earl Fisher.
And I stand with Planned Parenthood.
It is our role as children of God to care for our fellow men and women.
Religion is really about enabling people to live lives of purpose and meaning.
To do all we can to make sure that those who are being oppressed will receive the type of support and advocacy they need.
As a person of faith, I believe that everybody should have access to health care.
Everybody is entitled to dignity.
It not only makes sense for us to support the work of Planned Parenthood.
People need more access to health care, more access to contraception, more access to education, all the services that Planned Parenthood provides.
For some women, that's the only health care provider they have.
When people of faith,
People of faith.
People of faith.
When people of faith speak up for reproductive justice, compassion becomes the order of the day.
We build bridges, we come together.
The narrative changes
Silence is no longer an option for us.
because the faith message has been co-opted.
And the idea that there is just one monopoly on a religious voice, that is not true, that has never been true, and that will never be true.
everything about what Planned Parenthood does really speaks, in my mind, to Jewish religious ethical values.
For me, that's ministry.
And that's the work of Planned Parenthood.
of the women's rights movement. And here we are today. Don't tell me what to say, and don't tell me what to do. Just let me be myself. That's all I ask of you. I'm young, and I love to be young. I'm free, and I love to be free to live my life the way that I want to say and do whatever I please. I'm young, I'm free to live and to say, you don't own me, you don't own me, you don't own me, you don't own me.
It is the time in our service where we honor the milestones that have happened in our lives. They come in through cards, through texts, through emails, and in different ways. Sometimes there is a joy or a sorrow or a significant transition. And today we have a milestone from member Carol Ruiz in the spirit of our fifth principle about promoting and participating in democracy in our congregations and in society at large. She writes, I am running for Dover Board of Aldermen to represent the 3rd Ward. Prayers and good vibes and advice, welcome. We do hold you, Carol, in our hearts at this time of putting yourself for leadership again. And may you be buoyed up by the prayers of this community, and may you move and lead us in ways of justice and healing. May it be so. Will you pray with me? Spirit of life, Spirit of siding with love, flow in us and through us and among us, and help us to become builders of a world where every child has access to clean drinking water and nourishing food, where every family has access to adequate housing and shelter that is affordable, where women and men and trans and non-binary folk have access to quality health care, and where every child and youth and adult can find a path to a meaningful, imaginative, curiosity-growing education. Help us to build a world where we see that our individual choices and the freedoms we desire are interwoven with collective liberation, that none of us are free until all of us are free. Help us to build a world where we can heal from trauma and pain and loss, where we can move with restorative action to put in place right relations among people, among all beings, and between us and Mother Earth. Help us to build a world where reproductive justice is realized, where people gain access to contraception for free, where women who are pregnant can gain access to counseling and health care that enable them to make the wise and best choices for their futures without the intervention of priests and politicians. Help us to build a world where we live more deeply into what it means to center those on the margins and to recognize that by doing so, we center the well-being of all. Amen, and blessed be, and may it be so.
Singer-songwriter Meg Flather was born to parents in the Peace Corps, Unitarian Universalists, and her mother was a nurse practitioner, midwife, delivered countless babies, performed countless abortions. Meg writes a song that helps us when we don't know what to do or what to say or where to begin. We are as strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. Strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. I'm drowning in the noise, staring at a screen, pounding on the desk, not saying what I mean. I shouted the loudest when they went low, sleepwalking through the day. Where did I go? We are as strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. Strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. The mighty are marching, I watch from inside. They organize, strategize, I hide. What binds us defines us. Who do I want to be? I look into the glass to remember me. Once I flew into the wind, once I swam against the stream, once I sounded the alarm, once I memorized places I pass, the loss is profound. These faces are calling me out of the shade. There's work to be done. Changes made. We are as strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. Strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night. We are strong, we are wise, we are strong, we are brave. We are as strong as our weakest link, wise when our children think, brave when we light a stranger's night.
Our UUA Side with Love campaign is the public advocacy campaign of Unitarian Universalists across the country, harnessing love's power to stop oppression. We raise our voices to strengthen our democracy and prevent voter suppression, to promote climate justice, to amplify the movements for Black lives and racial justice, to side with humane immigration laws, to advocate for LGBTQIA+ rights, gender justice, and reproductive justice. Today, we join with hundreds of UU congregations around our nation who are holding Reproductive Justice Sundays during the 30 Days of Love campaign between the Martin Luther King holiday and Valentine's Day. At the outset of this sermon, as I did at the outset of this service, I want to acknowledge that our topic today is one that carries with it a legacy of shame, of grief, of trauma, of racism, of inequity, and all kinds of pain and challenge. This is what makes it difficult and also so necessary for us to speak about. Too many religious communities do not celebrate human sexuality and instead make this natural, beautiful part of what it means to be human shameful. The emphasis on abstinence only until marriage, and I'll add heterosexual marriage, which is not a realistic path or even a wise path for many. This emphasis simply leads to a situation where more teenagers who are sexually active don't know how to be safe and wind up with an unwanted pregnancy. I remember well that in my all-girls high school, there were so many prohibitions about what the teacher could say in our health and sex ed class that we never once heard the word condom, not even in our senior year. It was one of the words that poor teacher was not allowed to say list. They hinted and used the word mechanism. There was a mechanism to prevent pregnancy, but that was it. Thanks to the About Your Sexuality AYS class that was taught to junior high students in my Unitarian Universalist congregation, I was able to connect the dots for myself and pass a note to my classmates about what was being not spoken of. The UU sexuality curriculum today is not just about meeting the needs of students hitting puberty, although It certainly does cover that. It is now called Our Whole Lives and covers developmentally relevant topics for young children all the way up through our elders. Next week, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Melanie Davis, the leader of the Our Whole Lives program at the UUA, into our pulpit. One great reason to enroll your children or yourself in an OWL class, or your grandchildren and yourself in an OWL class, is to counter the shame and conflicting emotions that arise from what so many have been taught about human development, gender identity, becoming sexually active, sexual orientation, and reproductive rights, including exercising the right to terminate a pregnancy and coming to terms with the reasons for making that choice. I remember well from a time I spent interning at Kings County Family Planning Clinic in Brooklyn, the wide and varied challenges that women faced when it came to issues of contraception, STI prevention, and choosing whether or not to give birth to a child. I learned during that time the danger of me as a privileged white college student, the limited view that I had on the issue up to that point. There were women who became pregnant who wanted the child, but shared that they couldn't afford it or the pregnancy care. There were women who were struggling with addiction and experienced hurdles when it came to implementing steps to prevent pregnancy and STIs. There were women who were recent immigrants whose spouse saw the request for a condom as a confession of cheating, which could lead to violence. There were women who were working 2 jobs and already struggling with childcare issues and how to pay for the expenses of that child or children, the ones they were already raising. There were women who came in for family counseling who were older than me at the time, who had never had someone explain all of their options. There were women who had been taught and whose partners believed that contraception was a sin and tried to do their best with the rhythm method. There was the woman who was HIV positive and wondered how much time she had left. This was the time before the breakthrough AZT cocktail was widely available. As a minister, the learning has continued as people, women, men, and non-binary folks come to UU ministers' offices from within and beyond our walls. We are known as a safer place to be able to have these conversations. And this has been my experience here in our community as well. There was the woman who wrestled with whether carrying a fetus to term and having the child of her abusive boyfriend would link her to him for the rest of her life in ways that felt unwise and dangerous. There was the woman who was recently accepted to graduate school and was in discernment about which future to move towards. There was the woman who was raped and wondered, would she always see his face for the rest of her life? There was the woman whose own life was being threatened by the wanted pregnancy. And the Side of Love campaign invited us to be vulnerable and share our own stories. So I'll share a glimpse of mine. I was so happy the day that I was told I was expecting twins. And then a couple of weeks later, something went terribly awry. And the doctor told me that I had to terminate one if I wanted a live child. The way that the pregnancy had gone awry would take them both. And the day I found the strength to go through with that procedure was one of the hardest in my life. The list goes on. And again, so many stories around family planning and discernment about whether or not to have an abortion carry shame, but also pain and loss and grief. Whether the fetus is terminated or whether the fetus is carried to term. And I'll also share that one child did survive that procedure, and many of you have met him. Sometimes the religious right accuses us of being pro-abortion. No one is pro-abortion. We would like to see greater access to contraception, for example, as a means to reduce the need for a procedure like an abortion. We are pro-access to abortion. We are pro the separation of church and state. We are pro politicians and priests having zero say in the matter. It is between a doctor or a midwife or a counselor and their patients, the woman or trans or non-binary person who is pregnant, and their partners if they are in the picture in healthy ways. Women have a right to self-determination over our bodies, and this is an extension of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Individual Unitarian Universalists may feel differently about this issue for themselves personally. There are a number of folks in our communities who would never opt for an abortion. That is the right choice for them. We support the choice to have or not to have an abortion, and a world where the pregnant person is able to make that decision without coercion, force, punishment, or the like. We are here to move with individuals and families without judgment in ways that liberate all of us from shame and help us to name and heal from our grief and pain. It matters that we are vocal and visible in our support of abortion access today, in the past, and in the future, especially since the religious right has been effective in capturing the media's attention and skewing the religious and moral perspective to the conservative one. By the way, let's be clear about how the religious right got involved with the anti-choice movement. At one point in history, the religion that took a stand against abortions was Catholicism, alongside their belief that contraception is also immoral. I'll name that there is an obvious contradiction in taking these two positions. When Roe v. Wade was passed by the Supreme Court legalizing abortion in 1973, many Baptists spoke in favor of the measure. For example, in 1971, delegates to the Southern Baptist Convention in St. Louis passed a resolution encouraging, quote, Southern Baptists to work for legislation that will allow the possibility of abortion under conditions as rape, incest, clear evidence of severe fetal deformity, and carefully ascertained evidence of the likelihood of damage to the emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother. The Southern Baptist Convention reaffirmed that position in 1974, a year after Roe passed, and again in 1976. The interesting thing about this is that many people believe that the origins of the religious right as a political force was galvanized around abortion. I've heard that story. I believed that story. No, it wasn't. So what was it about? It turns out it was about the right to have segregated schools. When school integration became the law of the land, white-only Christian schools were formed, and a number of white students left the public school classrooms. There were legal cases connected to whether these schools should be tax exempt, and the court cases came down on this side. Racially segregated private schools do not qualify for tax exemptions under the IRS codes that were enacted after the Civil Rights Movement. Now, Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich, the founder of the Heritage Society, were leaders of this movement. Now, they realized that they couldn't have the public charge be about segregation, and they needed to find another issue to continue to tap into the anger that they had fomented amongst conservatives. Following Roe, there was a spike in legal abortions and probably an accompanying spike in healthier women, and some felt uncomfortable about this. So that was their opening. They thought, let's capitalize on this as a second public issue. Evangelicals began to organize around, quote, the rights of Christian schools, the rights of fetuses, and over and against the rising tide of what they often spoke about, of secular humanism. It is important that we understand that the history of racism and anti-choice movements are linked. They are the same movement. It is also true that our movement for reproductive rights must be intertwined with a commitment to anti-racism, intersectionality, and collective liberation. The language and the agenda of the religious left, us, has shifted from religious rights and pro-choice to pro-access and reproductive justice. Let me share just a little bit about the framework for reproductive justice. The term was coined in 1994 by a group of Black women in Chicago. They realized that the women's rights movement was led by middle and upper class white women, and that a movement that centered the needs of women of color, other marginalized women, and trans people was needed. 3 years later, Sister Song was created, a national multi-ethnic reproductive justice organization that our UU Faith Action New Jersey works closely with through our Reproductive Justice Task Force, alongside of others like Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, and Progressive Faith Networks. Here is how Sister Song defines reproductive justice, in case you hadn't heard this nuance between the choice and rights movement and the justice movement. Here it goes. Reproductive justice is a human right. It is based on the United Nations internationally accepted Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a comprehensive body of law that details the rights of individuals and the responsibility of government to protect those rights. Reproductive justice is about access, not choice. Mainstream movements have focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice. That is necessary, but it's not enough. Even when abortion is legal, many women of color cannot afford it or cannot travel hundreds of miles to the nearest clinic. There is no choice where there is no access. And I'll mention, when I was an intern minister in Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the ministries of the congregation was actually helping people cross state lines to pay for their travel and their hotel to be able to even access an abortion. Reproductive justice is not just about abortion. Abortion access is critical, and women of color and other marginalized women also have difficulty accessing contraception, comprehensive sex education, STI prevention and care, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support our families, safe homes, and so much more. And you can read more by going to Sister Song's website or participating in the Reproductive Justice Task Force of UU Faith Action. Unitarian Universalists have been on the front lines of reproductive rights and access, including contraception and abortion access, for a long, long while. One example, the Women's Alliance of the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Dallas in 1969 realized that the laws around abortion access needed to change, and they played a role in shaping the case that would ultimately become Roe v. Wade. A number of women in the Alliance were involved in writing the amicus brief for the case, and they were very involved in galvanizing support amongst the women in Texas and beyond. We continue to locate ourselves on the front lines, and we must make the move from legal choice to comprehensive access and reproductive justice with a lens as to how women of color and other marginalized folks are impacted. This is about a right not to have a child, as well as to have a child in healthy and sustainable contexts. We need to learn and know the history of forced sterilization in our country of African Americans and Native Americans. We need to understand how legal access without financial access or a nearby abortion clinic is the equivalent of no access for many. On one hand, we should celebrate that the New Jersey State Legislature passed the Reproductive Freedom of Choice Act just last month in the face of so many assaults on Roe v. Wade occurring around the country. In the first 5 months of last year, there were 561 restrictions introduced across 47 states. And the Supreme Court may well overturn or gut Roe v. Wade this year. Many of us focused on and heard about the restrictions in Texas that were passed about only allowing an abortion up to 6 weeks. But listen to this. 561 restrictions were introduced across 47 states. So yes, we should celebrate that New Jersey took a stand on legal access. However, the legislation we passed in our state was a far cry from the original Reproductive Freedom Act that was put forth. It is still largely focused on individual choice, and it doesn't add requirements such as health insurance coverage of abortions or birth control. As long as some of us don't have reproductive freedom, it isn't good enough. We need to celebrate a step forward, but not stop there. Many of us know personally in our lives and in our families' stories our connections to fertility and infertility, abortion, adoption, maternal death, stillbirths, rape, sterilization, all kinds of harrowing journeys. Let us affirm in this space that people have a right to bodily autonomy, to self-determination with the input of their caregivers and intimate partners as to what are the pathways of health, sustainability, and love. They have a right to make decisions and to their joy and grief around those decisions. It is a private matter, while ensuring that all have access is a matter of public health. So is the need to create affordable housing, quality public schools, and healthcare systems committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is interesting that the religious right, who has co-opted conservative politics, cares so much for the well-being of a collection of cells or a fetus from the first day of existence, but refuse to work for the well-being of the children that they may one day become, or the well-being of the mothers who carry these children. A lot of that was cut out of. That's the difference between the Reproductive Choice Act we passed and the Reproductive Freedom Act that was proposed. We must raise our voices and amplify the leadership of women of color and others with marginalized identities, and continue to work for a day where love wins out and all have the choices and resources to thrive. Amen. And may it be so. And may we journey onward with one another and with our sisters and all who have marginalized identities here in this community and outside of our community until it is so, friends. May we make it so.
Our closing song is number 1007, There's a River Flowin' in My Soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul.
Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. But take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. So go forth this day and know that you are blessed with all your hurts and with all your hopes and gifts. So go into the day and share those gifts and your stories with the world. Go forth and be a blessing. You heard me make the announcement. I did announce about